Finally, FBI recovers Nolan Wells' ghost Snapchat data. Could it finally reveal the cause of his death? An 18-year-old goes out on a boat with friends. He comes back in a body bag. His phone comes back wiped clean. Take a look at this for a moment. Somewhere in Mississippi, sitting in a secure evidence locker, is a small black rectangle. A standard smartphone. Not a rumor, not an online conspiracy theory, an actual physical device that was in Nolan Wells' pocket or sitting on a boat seat during the final hours of his life. And right now, weeks into this investigation, there is an infuriating fact you need to understand. There is no publicly confirmed, independently verified forensic report of this device on the official record. Think about how insane that actually is. In an investigation with this much national attention, the single most critical piece of evidence has been trapped in a complete legal standoff. On one side, you have the legal team representing the young men who were on that boat. Their attorney sat in front of cameras. He stated plainly that his clients had no reason to touch Nolan's phone. He claimed any suggestion of deleted text messages or missing Snapchat activity is completely false. On the other side, commentators began pushing a narrative that Nolan's family was hiding the device. They claimed the family refused to hand it over. Now, stop right there. Look at the logical contradiction staring everyone in the face. How can an attorney declare with absolute certainty that nothing was deleted from that phone if that same phone has never undergone a full, documented forensic examination? Those two statements cannot both be true. You cannot verify the contents of a hard drive without extracting the data first. It is a scientific impossibility. Nolan was not an erratic kid. He was an 18-year-old preparing for college with plans to go to law school. His daily habits were structured, constant, and predictable. He lived on his phone like any teenager. And that predictable routine is exactly why what happened next set off every alarm. Let us talk about what ghost data actually is, because there is a massive misconception about how modern smartphones work. People think when a message disappears from an app, it disappears from reality. It does not. When you use an application like Snapchat, data is written to the flash memory of the device. It does not just float into thin air. It leaves behind physical traces in the hardware. First, there are local cache files. These are temporary storage directories. The phone saves compressed image fragments, video previews, and text strings to load faster. When an app deletes the display file, those cached fragments often stay untouched in unallocated memory. Second, there are SQLite databases. Every modern mobile application relies on them. Every single message sent, received, or queued creates an internal database row. That row logs a sender ID, a recipient ID, a media format, and an exact timestamp down to the millisecond. When a user deletes a message, the operating system does not overwrite the storage immediately. It simply marks that database entry as inactive. It becomes an orphaned record. The text is hidden from the screen, but the raw database entry remains physically present. Then, you have operating system activity logs. Your phone records its own life independently of any app. System logs track the exact millisecond the Snapchat application was opened. They log how long the camera hardware stayed engaged. They log power states, background pings, and connection handshakes. Even if someone manually scrubs an application, they cannot scrub the underlying system logs without wiping the entire operating system. That is what ghost data means. It is the invisible underlying architectural footprint left behind on the phone's physical storage chips. When federal investigators use tools like Celebrite or Graykey, they do not just unlock the screen and scroll. They bypass the user interface entirely. They pull a bit-by-bit physical extraction of the flash memory. They reconstruct deleted databases. They pull orphaned cache records out of unallocated space. And they rebuild the timeline second by second. If Nolan's phone underwent a federal extraction, investigators would not just see what was left behind. They would see what was removed. They would see exactly when it was removed, and they would see which user account initiated the action. Now, look at how this entire dispute started. When Nolan did not return home, his phone was eventually brought back to his family. His mother went through the device. She was not looking for a conspiracy. She was looking for her son. She knew his habits. She knew how often he took photos. She knew the rhythm of his daily communication. And during the critical hours on that water, the phone was an absolute ghost town. No active group chats, no photos saved to the local storage, no outgoing Snapchat interactions. For an active teenager on a summer boat trip, that complete digital flatline made zero sense. It was an unnatural silence. The family immediately recognized the danger. They did not refuse to hand over the phone. Their legal representatives made a specific, formal request. They requested a joint forensic examination. They wanted independent forensic experts present. They wanted documented chain of custody, and they wanted federal oversight. Think about why that distinction matters. Refusing an unconditional handover is not the same as refusing an examination. In a region with deep, multi-generational social connections between local institutions and prominent families, demanding documented oversight is not obstruction. It is basic, rational self-preservation. And there is a broader reality here that cannot be ignored. This case involves a black teenager who went out on the water with white peers, and only one of them did not survive. In Mississippi, that history carries an undeniable weight. A family in that position has every reason to demand that evidence be handled under the strictest scientific protocol possible. Here is the question that cuts through the noise. If local authorities believed the family was withholding critical evidence, why was a legal order never enforced? The law provides a specific tool for this exact scenario. A subpoena duces tecum, a formal court order compelling the production of physical evidence. If investigators believed critical evidence was being blocked, a judge could have signed that order in an hour. The fact that the public was fed a narrative of obstruction while standard legal tools remained unused tells you everything you need to know about the disconnect between cable news commentary and actual institutional action. So here is where the first chapter of this case lands. The phone exists. The ghost data inside that flash memory can be extracted, and the scientific tools exist to prove whether that digital silence was natural or deliberately manufactured. If you want to understand how digital forensics actually works in cases like this, not the cable news version, but the real science, you need to be subscribed to Detective Crime Hour right now. Because in Chapter 2, we are going to walk through the 30-minute gap in the boat's GPS data that nobody in the official narrative has ever explained, the dock security cameras that recorded the departure and mysteriously failed on the return, and what the recovered ghost data could definitively prove. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications. You are not going to want to miss what comes next. Now let us talk about the timeline that was already broken before anyone ever touched that phone. Listen to the sworn interview given by the friend group. They describe a direct, high-speed run back to safety, 40 to 42 miles per hour, pushing water out of a flooded hull. One quick mechanical stop in Fort Bayou, a friend replaces a drain plug, then straight to the dock for the night. That is the official story. Clean, simple, uninterrupted. Now look at the electronic GPS log from that vessel. At 5:44 in the afternoon, the boat arrives at a location on El Camino Road. 8 minutes later, it departs east into Fort Bayou. That matches the drain plug story. 6 minutes after that, the boat turns around and returns to El Camino Road, and then it stops, and it sits completely motionless for 30 full minutes. Look at that gap, 30 unexplained minutes. Nothing in any recorded interview addresses that half hour. Nothing in the public statements explains why the boat stopped. It simply sits in the data, entirely unaccounted for. Now we have to look at this with forensic discipline. GPS data requires rigorous authentication. Investigators must verify the internal clock calibration. They must confirm the exact device ID, and they must prove that specific hardware was mounted on that specific hull. A digital discrepancy does not automatically prove a crime. People forget things during high-stress situations. Timelines get blurred after traumatic events. But 30 minutes is not a momentary lapse in memory. It is a documented physical stop on the water that directly contradicts the sworn timeline. And in a death investigation, unexplained time gaps demand an official answer. Now look at the boats themselves, because the logistics of that day create even more questions. The friend describes 3 specific vessels in his statement: a Triton, a smaller Palm Beach boat, and a vessel owned by a friend named Bart. In his recorded interview, he states he rode with Bart. He was providing transportation for a group of college friends. Then, later in that exact same statement, he mentions his personal belongings were loaded on the Palm Beach. If he was operating on Bart's boat, who was operating the Palm Beach carrying his gear? To this day, not a single public account has identified who was at the helm of that vessel. Then look at the passenger count. Bart allegedly agreed on extremely short notice to absorb somewhere between 10 and 16 extra passengers. The explanation given was that Bart's father canceled last minute. Think through the basic logistics of that statement. If this trip was planned weeks in advance, where were those 16 passengers originally supposed to ride? Why did an 18-year-old boat operator suddenly take on an entire overflow crowd moments before pushing off from the launch? Then there is the question of a fourth vessel. Online investigators analyzing photos from that day pointed out what appears to be a black propeller. It is visible on the far side of the three confirmed boats. It does not match the known hull markings of the group. We need to be entirely fair and objective here. A dark shape in a low-resolution photo proves nothing. It does not identify an operator. It does not prove that vessel had any involvement in Nolan's death. Visual speculation on social media is not evidence. But basic investigative protocol requires closing open loops. Official investigators should have interviewed every boater in that inlet, cataloged every hull in the area, and eliminated that question immediately. Leaving it open only fuels public distrust. Okay, stop for a second. Think about what we just laid out. A 30-minute gap that nobody has explained, a boat logistics story that contradicts itself in the same interview, and we have not even gotten to the security cameras yet. If this case matters to you, if you believe an 18-year-old deserves a real investigation instead of a PR battle, then subscribe to Detective Crime Hour right now and share this video with someone who needs to see it, because the next 10 minutes are going to change how you understand this entire timeline. Do not click away. Now let us talk about the cameras that worked perfectly in the morning and somehow failed when it mattered most. The residential property where the boat docked that evening had a functioning security camera system. Investigators have verified footage from that morning. It clearly shows the group loading up. It shows the boats departing. It shows Nolan Wells alive and stepping onto the deck. So where is the footage from that night? The single most critical window of the entire timeline. The exact moment the boat returned to the dock. The footage that would prove who stepped off the boat, what time they arrived, and whether Nolan was still with them, that footage does not exist. To be completely fair, security cameras fail for everyday reasons. Hard drives overwrite data when storage runs out. Motion sensors fail to trigger in low light. Cameras get knocked out of alignment during routine yard work. An equipment failure is not automatic proof of a cover-up. However, in a professional death investigation, the standard cannot be assumptions. Forensic technicians should have pulled the DVR hard drive. They should have examined the system event logs. They should have documented whether the drive was overwritten, manually unplugged, or experiencing a genuine hardware failure. That is the bare minimum required to stop rumors from turning into full-blown public outrage. And that brings us directly back to the FBI's recovery of the ghost Snapchat data. This is why that digital extraction changes everything. Because physical evidence and spoken accounts are currently in conflict. The digital record inside Nolan's phone does not rely on human memory. It does not care about legal statements. Here is what that recovered federal data can definitively resolve. Scenario 1. If the extracted ghost data shows Nolan's phone was actively receiving and sending normal data through the evening, it proves the digital silence was simply an app display issue. The suspicion surrounding deleted messages collapses. That would be a massive step toward clearing the people on that boat. Scenario 2. If the database recovery proves data was manually deleted, forensic logs will pinpoint the exact second the deletion command was sent. If that timestamp lands during the unexplained 30-minute GPS stop at El Camino Road, investigators have a direct link to physical activity on that vessel. Scenario 3. Modern smartphones log background cell tower handshakes and Wi-Fi access point probes. If Nolan's device recorded location pings that place him somewhere away from the boat's GPS track, the entire official route is completely disproven. Scenario 4. If the data simply confirms the timeline given by the young men on that water, then the case finally moves past speculation. It gives the family verified scientific proof instead of endless rumors on social media. Forensic science is not a weapon for one side of a case. It is a neutral standard. It does not pick a team. It simply tells you what happened on the hardware. Now we have to address the question that almost nobody following this case wants to entertain. What if there is no conspiracy at all? What if there was no coordinated effort to hide the truth? What if this was a horrific, chaotic boating accident, followed by panicked teenagers making poor communication decisions, amplified by an incomplete local investigation? Tragic accidents happen on the water every single summer, and internet commentary has a dangerous tendency to turn disorganized reality into an elaborate criminal plot. The only way to answer that question is not through TikTok commentary or cable news panels. It is through documented, verified science. And if the opposite is true, if someone on that water committed a criminal act, the standard remains identical. Rumors cannot put someone in prison. Grainy photos of propellers cannot secure a conviction. Only verifiable physical and digital evidence can do that. So as this investigation moves forward, these are the only 4 questions that actually matter. 1. Where is Nolan Wells' physical phone right now? 2. Has the federal extraction report been officially certified? 3. Was the digital chain of custody documented without error? 4. What do the recovered timestamps show during that 30-minute GPS gap? Nolan Wells was 18 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him. He stepped onto a boat with people he trusted, and he never walked off. He does not need internet rumors. He does not need public relations statements. He deserves a thorough, transparent, and complete investigation. He deserves the cold, objective truth. If this case matters to you, do not just watch this video and scroll past. Subscribe to Detective Crime Hour. Turn on every notification and share this with one person who has been following this story and deserves to see the actual forensic breakdown instead of the noise. We will be covering every update the moment the FBI report drops. You need to be here when it does. I will see you in the next one.